Hi there. Today I want to tell you about an unusual case that will be heard this fall at the Ontario Court of Appeal. The question in the case is a pretty weird one. Is requiring teachers to know math racist? I mean, I don't think it is, but apparently the divisional court disagrees. I can't wait to tell you all about it. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Christine, and I'm the litigation director for the Canadian Constitution Foundation, a legal charity that fights for fundamental freedoms in Canada. I upload regular videos about our ongoing cases and about other interesting developments in constitutional law in Canada. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, please hit like and subscribe below. It really helps my videos out a lot. Also, please remember, nothing in my videos is legal advice. If you have your own legal question or problem, please consult your own lawyer. So this case, I call it the Math is Racist case. It's actually called Ontario and Petrucci. And the facts of it are pretty straightforward. The Ontario government was concerned about low and dropping math scores for students. And as a part of a multi-pronged strategy to improve those scores, they created a new requirement for Ontario teacher candidates. To get qualified as a teacher in Ontario, you had to pass a math test that included questions from grades 3, 6, and 9 math, as well as a component on how to teach math or math pedagogy. A group of teacher candidates did not want to do this math test, and they were supported by the Ontario Teachers Federation in a legal challenge to the test. They alleged that the test was discriminatory because some racial and linguistic groups failed the test at higher rates than white teacher candidates. Now, bizarrely, the divisional court sided with the teacher candidates. They found that the math test was unjustified discrimination and struck it down. Now, I want to make one thing from the outset very, very clear. There is nothing about your race that makes you better or worse at math, even though, in my opinion, it seems like that is what the teacher candidates in this case were arguing. Now, let's take a step back and look at the test itself, because it's really important for how the divisional court reached this bizarre conclusion. The Ontario government's concern over student math scores, it was not overblown. The scores were pretty grim. Starting in 2015, Ontario elementary students' math scores, which were measured by an organization called ICAO, the Ontario Education Accountability Office, those scores began to decline. Between the 2015-16 school year and the 2018-19 school year, the percentage of students achieving at or above the provincial standard dropped from 63% to 58% for grade 3 students. And for grade 6 students, the scores were even worse. They fell during that time period from 50% to 48%. So the Ontario government obviously was concerned with this, and they developed a 4-year math strategy to improve these embarrassing scores. That strategy included all kinds of things like funding for math learning leads at school boards, funding for summer school in math, funding for online tutoring in math, funding for more math education for teachers, and funding for math-focused early intervention pilot projects for students. But the controversy only arose out of that one part of the government strategy that required teachers to take a test on math. Now, you may be thinking, not every teacher teaches math, so why make them take this test? Well, there's actually a good reason. The math test requirement was adopted because principals can assign a teacher to teach math even if they don't have the appropriate qualifications. The government has said that because of the competitive nature of teaching positions, newly certified teachers may find that the only positions available for them are positions that require them to teach math, even if that wasn't their intention and even if they aren't qualified. So your child, or you, if you're a student, could end up with a teacher who doesn't have the qualifications to teach math. So to overcome this problem, the government said, let's make sure that all teachers have a basic level of math. This wasn't just a concern for the government. It was a concern for parents as well. In 2017, the Ontario Ministry of Education did an opinion poll of Ontario parents, and it showed that more focus on math and better trained teachers was the measure parents believed was most likely to improve student scores. And there are also plenty of other places that have a math test requirement for teachers. The United Kingdom, New Zealand, Australia, Japan, Singapore, China, and a number of US states all have some form of universal math test for teacher candidates. This isn't some novel, controversial idea. So to develop the test, the government gave that job to ACAO, the Ontario Education Accountability Office. To develop the test, what ACAO did was they pulled question from existing standardized tests that they give to students. So yeah, the teachers needed to pass the same math test that they give to students. They actually made it easier as well. They made it a 2-hour test that the candidates were given 3 hours to complete. And they were also given an unlimited number of times to retake the test. And no one would ever know that they failed. The Teachers College would only ever be told about passes. Oh, and I can't forget, the math questions were screened for cultural sensitivity. Now, they had already been screened for cultural sensitivity when they were developed for grade 3, 6, and 9 math assessments for the students. So they'd already gone through this first review against a rubric that factored in identity, social justice, and equity issues. But the ACAO also engaged a committee of external members of the college, as well as internal ACAO staff, to conduct a second review of the test for bias and sensitivity to equity issues. The test questions were reviewed to determine whether demographic indicators or knowledge of culturally specific information would predict reduced performance on questions. Now, I will stop here to admit that I really don't know what that means. For the life of me, I do not know how you screen a grade 3 math test for cultural sensitivity. But I will give the government the benefit of the doubt that they spent a lot of money and put a lot of effort into making sure their math test wasn't racist, whatever that means. But even this wasn't enough. The pass and fail rate of the math test differed along racial and linguistic categories. Now, this part is drawn directly from the decision. The court found that candidates who identify as Black and Indigenous had a success rate on the test 20 percentage points lower than white candidates. And French-speaking candidates had a significantly lower rate of success than English-speaking candidates, and candidates who spoke neither English or French had an even lower rate of success. Those candidates performed poorly even on the subsequent efforts to redo the test. The court also found that the majority of French-speaking candidates who were not successful on the math portion of the test were also unsuccessful on the pedagogy, the teaching component of the test. So that all comes from the case. So what the teachers alleged, what these teacher candidates alleged, was that the math test violated their charter right to be free from discrimination. They said that because the pass or fail rate can be mapped along racial and linguistic lines, the test was discrimination. And this seems strange, but it all comes from a case from 2020 called Fraser. The case law on Section 15 of the Charter, which guarantees the right to be free from discrimination, the case law now emphasizes something called adverse impact discrimination. And that comes from that Fraser case. So based on Fraser, the court in this math case, Petrucci, held that Section 15 equality rights are limited whenever government action impacts a protected group, like a racial group or a linguistic group, more severely than a relevantly comparable group, like white teacher candidates. And when that disparity has the effect of reinforcing, exacerbating, or perpetuating disadvantage. The crucial part is that there's not actually a need to demonstrate any causal connection between that difference or disparity and the disadvantaged group's characteristic. And there's no need to show that all of the disadvantaged group's members are similarly affected. So there's not a need to show a connection between race and ability to do math because there isn't a connection. Just the fact that there was a statistical difference between a disadvantaged group and a comparator group is enough to find that there was discrimination. So the court found that the math test was discriminatory because it had an adverse impact on certain races, a higher fail rate among certain races, even though there is not necessarily a connection between the test and race. And the court found that this discrimination was not justified because the test, they said, could have been replaced by something else, a math course, for example. But the problem is, how are we supposed to know that a math course wouldn't also result in adverse impacts on different maths pass-fail rates along that can also be mapped to racial lines? The problem here is that the test that was developed for Section 15 equality claims in Fraser is irrational and unworkable. It can lead to conclusions like this one in Petrucci, where a right has been breached, even if it's just some statistical anomaly, even when there was no intention to discriminate, and even when there's no connection between the adversely affected group and the actual government action. The test isn't racist. And I might suggest that the opposite is true. Saying that it is too much to ask racialized teachers to know math, that is the racist thing. Math isn't racist. Thinking that some people can't do math because of their race is the racist thing. And that is the argument that, in my opinion, was advanced by these teacher candidates and was accepted by the courts. It's also completely bananas to me that this decision came out in the middle of the pandemic. We at the CCF were fighting tooth and nail over some of the greatest restrictions on liberty that we had ever seen. There were unprecedented rights violations. Yet it was math that the courts somehow found was unconstitutional. So what is happening now? Well, the math case, Petrucci, is going to be heard at the Court of Appeal, and we at the Canadian Constitution Foundation are intervening to argue for a coherent interpretation to the right to equality. And we'll be arguing that the government made all kinds of accommodations to ensure that the test was fair, and that having requirements that are directly related to the performance of the job, having teachers know math, that is reasonable and justified. If you want to learn more about this case, you can visit our website at theccf.ca. We have a petition up there that you can sign to let the government know, yeah, I do not think that math is racist. You can also sign up for our email updates at theccf.ca/freedom updates. And that way you will be informed as this case progresses through the courts. Okay, that's all for this update. Thanks for watching, and let's keep fighting for freedom in Canada.